Well, thank you. It will be less tech-related and more law, and I understand that not everybody likes the law as much as I do. Try to keep it as interesting as possible, but I totally understand if sometimes you drift off a bit, but I try to keep you close with me. With the short introduction we just had, I'm going to talk about the new EU-US data privacy framework. I'm guessing you already heard about it. Maybe you heard about Privacy Shield 2.0 or the TADPF or the framework or the privacy framework. It's all the same. I'm going to tell a bit more about what it is, what solution it should offer and doesn't really offer, what I think the future will be, and also give you a small lesson in history. So I hope that after my presentation, if you have any discussions in the future about this subject, you know what the real discussion is about and what the real risks are, and maybe what we're heading for in the future. But a short introduction about myself. We just had the introduction. I'm the data protection officer at Pivot Pro. We offer a privacy-proof analytics solution, and like just said, I'm also a privacy lawyer, which is super fun in this time because it's going all places and everything changes almost by the day or by the week or by the month, so you have to keep up to date. Where did it all begin? Because to understand what happened and what needs to happen, I need to take you back to the start. I won't start at the true beginning, but at oral law. So it's a small lesson in history and privacy, and I hope you don't end up like SpongeBob here in his chair. Here in the EU, we have the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a privacy law, and like the name reveals itself, it's a regulation. And a regulation means that it's directly applicable to all EU member states. So sometimes you have a directive, and then we have a set of rules, and we say to the EU member states, you can take these rules and make your own law of it. Where the regulations are different, then we have a set of rules and we say you translate it to your own language. So sometimes people here in the Netherlands say, oh, I have to comply with we call it the AVG and with the GDPR. That's not true. The GDPR is just a translation of the AVG, but it might be a bit confusing. With the GDPR, that's our privacy law, and it protects personal data. It actually says you're not allowed to process personal data unless the GDPR says you can do so. And what is personal data? From our perspective, an IP address is personal data, or online unique identifiers personal data. So this term is super broad. So sometimes we say, I don't know if his name is Frank or whatever. I'll only have this unique identifier. But since we just stick it to an unknown person, we still have to see it as personal data. And that's done purposely because we have more technical solutions to follow people. Even if we don't know exactly who it is, we can identify the same person again and again. And if that's the case, the GDPR applies. Well, we have a few basic rules, such as we have to be transparent about what we do. I heard purpose limitation in the last panel. These are all basic rules that are set by the GDPR. But we also have one other important rule, and as the EU, we think we don't want personal data from EU data subjects, so they don't have to be based in the EU, but just move around in the EU. We don't want the data from these personal data from these data subjects to leave the EU to a third country where the level of data protection is less than we want from the member states in the GDPR. So we say when it goes to a third country and when it leaves the European Union, we want it to be just as good as protected as here in the EU, or even better, but less is no option. And to do so, we have some solutions in the GDPR, and one of them is, maybe you heard of it, we call it standard contractual clauses. It's a standard contract adopted by the European Commission. If you work together with a party outside of the EU, you can close that contract. You're not allowed to change it, the contract itself, and then it's all good, because the party outside of the EU basically promises to comply with the GDPR. Another solution is a so-called adequacy decision. And with an adequacy decision, the European Commission basically says, I think this third country is all good, and I will make an adequacy decision for it, saying that when the data leaves to that specific third country, we say that the level of data protection is ensured and guaranteed and adequate. So, what did we do for the US? Probably you already know what will be next, but we made an adequacy decision. And it's nothing new, because a small lesson of history, I said, I would take you back to the beginning of a never-ending story, back to the year 2000. We now have the GDPR. We have it since 2018, and the whole world was upside down when the GDPR became applicable. What's going to happen to us? So many privacy rules, everything is going to change. Can we still do what we're doing? Well, basically, we already had a European privacy law that was almost the same as the GDPR. We had a lot of same rules, and the rules about the data leaving the EU to a third country that had to ensure the same level of protection. We've had it since 1999. So there's nothing new. So we needed something back in the time, in 2000, because back then we also wanted to work with companies based in the US. So we made something and we called it Safe Harbor, the Safe Harbor program. And this program said if a company based in the US self-certifies itself and says it will comply with the Safe Harbor program, a company in the EU can transfer data to that company in the US. And that's what happened. And that's when Max Schrems came along. And maybe you've heard of his name. He's a privacy activist and a privacy lawyer. And he said, well, Facebook is self-certified under the Safe Harbor program, but it sends my data to the US. And I'm pretty sure in the US, they also have some national laws saying that the US government can access my data as a non-US person. And I don't think that complies with our privacy law. So what did he do? He made a complaint. He sent it to his data protection authority in Ireland. And they didn't really do anything about it because Facebook is big, and what's the Irish DPA going to do about that? So Max wasn't happy, and he said, well, in that case, I'm going to the Court of Justice of the European Union, and I'll just make a case from it, and you better fix it. That's what happened. The Court of Justice said, well, Max, you're right. The Safe Harbor program, it's good, but a US company is in a bit of a hard position, because if you have to say I'm going to comply with the EU law, but at the same time you have to comply with the national US laws and they don't match with each other, how are they going to do that? So the Safe Harbor program, we will invalidate it, and it ends right here. But then there was a real panic, because how can we use US services as an EU organization if there's no legal basis to do so? So we needed something new. And the European Commission knew there was a need to make something new, because there's in no way there's going to be an option that the EU won't work together with the US companies anymore. We're super dependent on it. There's a big vendor lock-in, not only for commercial organizations, but think about the EU government. Think about Microsoft, Google, Amazon. So they thought of the Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield program, it's great for organizations because back then, no more insecurity. They had something they could base the data transfer on again. If an organization was self-certified by the Privacy Shield program and it said, I will comply with the rules in the Privacy Shield, it will be all good. But Max still wasn't happy, because Privacy Shield didn't really make a solution for all the problems that were there with Safe Harbor. So he did the same as he did in the beginning. He went to the Irish Data Protection Authority, he made a complaint with Facebook, and he went to the Court of Justice again. And again, they say, hi Max, nice to see you again. I'm sorry, but you're right, so we have to invalidate the Privacy Shield. Okay, so that took him 4 years, from the Privacy Shield to the end of it. In the meantime, we needed something, and in the beginning I said super shortly, we not only have an adequacy decision, but also, for example, a standard contract you can use. And luckily, we still had the standard contractual clauses for us, so we could still use US services and have a legal basis. There was something new added to it, basically saying, if you're going to use a US provider, you have to make sure that you do an individual check with every provider if there are any risks. So we just give more work to organizations, more actually just point at the organizations, you make sure you fix it, that the US organization treats your data right, even though we all think that on a legal basis it's not possible. So it's a super weird situation. So we need something new, and here it is. We call it the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework, and it's basically the same as Privacy Shield and Safe Harbor. But we need something, so just let's make something new and just look at what the issues are, see what we can fix on a quick note, because it was pretty quick between Privacy Shield, and then see how long it lasts. That's the feeling I get here. So I'm not sure how long it will last. We saw with Safe Harbor and the Privacy Shield 4 years, 3 years. And I'm going to show what's happening right now already on the legal basis and court cases considering the framework. But first, I want to tell you more a bit background information. What are the issues? Why is it a problem? So it's called the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework Program. And it's a program, again, a self-certification program. Organizations can join it. And if they do so, they comply with not only the EU, but also the UK and the Swiss law, saying that when data is transferred to the US, but also from the US to the EU, everything is all good. It's an adequacy decision, so you don't have the standard contractual clauses you have to use. Sometimes it's a bit confusing, but you don't need the framework and the SCCs. And it's basically amazing, because for the organizations, it gives a legal basis again to transfer data. But what's the real issue? I said in the beginning, we have the GDPR and the US national laws. And they have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702. And it basically states that the US government can use intelligence surveillance for non-US persons, so non-national US persons, without a warrant. And that doesn't really match with the GDPR we have. I'm not stating that here in the EU our governments are doing fine. I can say that a few years ago, the Netherlands was #1 in listening to telephone conversations. So I'm not saying we're doing everything better, but it's hard to say you comply with the GDPR when you also have a US national law that tells you to do something different. So the US government can ask, for example, Google or Facebook, give me access to the data because I want to see it. And Max said, since 2000, basically, we have the same problems. And they tried to fix it. I'm going to tell you a bit more about how they fixed it, or not, and what's happening. But basically, since 2000, we have the problem with or since Safe Harbor, we have the problem with the Foreign Intelligence Services Act. And it hasn't, the act hasn't really been changed even after the invalidation of the different programs. So every time we just add something in the text or say we will do something different, but there's no real solution to something. So we keep on going through the same circle again, because the US national laws aren't changed that much that we in the EU think it's good enough. And this is really important with the last framework we had, because the Foreign Intelligence Services Act would end this year, 2023, but it has a sunset clause, so they can decide to renew it again and keep it there again. And if we didn't agree on the framework right now, we could push a little bit to say, well, if you're going to renew it, you have to reform it to make sure we can transfer data on a good basis. But now we have a framework, there's no real need to reform it, because this framework will probably last for 3 years, 4 years, and after that, well, we have to start all over again. So I think this one is, I don't want to call it funny, because it's not a funny situation, but we say you can't just access data from people. We have a definition saying that you can only use the data that's necessary. So what they did for the executive order that the US made for this program is that we added the word proportionate. That's great, because when something is proportionate, it means you can't just ask for access to the data and do whatever you like. But the problem with this word proportionate is that the EU and the US didn't agree on the meaning of the word proportionate. So I can just add the word proportionate, and if I think it's proportionate, I'm saying proportionate a lot right now, I can just do whatever I want because I feel like it's proportionate. We didn't make a specific definition for it. So just adding a word doesn't solve the solution if we didn't make a definition saying what it means and if it matches with the word proportionate that we have from our privacy law. Another issue is judicial redress, which basically means that as a non-US citizen, we don't have the option to go to court in the US if we feel like our privacy rights have been infringed. And here in the EU, we can go to court if we think our privacy authority doesn't do enough, or if we feel like an organization has breached our rights. But I can't go to America and say to Google, well, you breached my rights, because I don't have that option. And that was a problem with Safe Harbor, but also with Privacy Shield. So with Safe Harbor, they tried to fix it to put the ombudsperson in the middle, but it still wasn't a solution to go to court. So what they did is they split the ombudsperson, they called it the Civil Liberties Protection Officer, and they also called it apart a court. But it's not really a court. So still, you can say you can go to court, but we just called it court, and it's not really court. And if you do so, you have to send a complaint to your European Data Protection Authority saying, I feel like they breached my fundamental privacy rights, this company in the US, and our privacy authority has to go to the US and say, well, you're breaching their rights. And then you get a standard answer, and I put it in italics. It's actually saying, without confirming or denying that the complainant was subject to the United States signal intelligence activities, so we're basically saying, we're not saying anything, we can't really tell you anything. So it's just all for giving us the feeling that it's solved, while we don't have a real solution. That makes me say, is a third time, is it a charm? If you look at what's happening right now, you can see on the, for me, it's the left. It's Philippe Latombe, and what he did, so it's not Max Schrems. What Philippe did is, there's an option in the EU that within 2 months after publication of new legislation, such as this framework, you have the opportunity to go to court, to the Court of Justice, and ask for annulment of the legislation. So what Philippe did, he said, I know Max Schrems is going to fight this again. And what will happen is that organizations will be in some kind of insecurity for 2 years or 3 years. Then they have to get legal help to fix this problem again, because the organizations basically are the victims, and not only the EU organizations, but also the US organizations. So let's just cut it out, let's just ask for annulment, let's just stop it right now when we still have time, and sit with each other and find a real solution, because this isn't working. I'm not sure if he will succeed, because if you ask for an annulment, you need to have, just call it personal interest, and as an individual, you don't really, we've seen that before, that they say you don't really have it in this case, but maybe because third time would be a charm, they look at it differently. If they don't, Max Schrems already said there will be a Schrems 3, because it's basically a copy of what they did before, and if I succeeded 2 times, I will so the 3rd time. And what would it mean for us? What would it mean for the organizations? If it is invalidated, we have to wait for the European data protection authorities to enforce the decision. So it doesn't mean that there will be fines if you work together with the US organization. That's not the case, because the authorities have to enforce it. What we've seen with the Privacy Shield and the standard contractual clauses is that they didn't really enforce it in the EU. So maybe you heard that Max Schrems, with his organization None of Your Business, NOYB, he sent 101 complaints about the use of Google Analytics, because Google sent data to the US, the IP address, and he sent it to 32 DPAs, and only 12 of them actually came into action. So that shows how little need they feel to do something about it. And from all the 73 cases, there were 13 in Austria, and there was only 1 fine in Sweden. So for enforcement in the EU, it's not really there. So if you look at it from a realistic point, this isn't about to fix something that should be a legal solution. This is about politics. We need the EU and the US to work together, so we just make a framework, agree on it, wait until it's invalidated again, and do the same thing over and over again. But the real victims here are the organizations, because every time a program is invalidated, you need legal help to get new contracts signed. Oh, you have all the discussions with your clients. Oh my God, you use an organization in the US. Is data stored with Amazon? Oh no, I don't want to use your service because that's super creepy. Well, basically, we're just saying that it's possible that the US government has access to the data. I don't think they will be interested in all the data. And also, look at what sometimes our own governments do. So why can't we just get a real solution, stop with the discussion, and think about what's really important? So how do we actually handle privacy? What do we actually do with transparency? What kind of data do we collect? Instead of just saying, we have a problem, all your organizations, you need all the legal stuff to be fixed, unless you can't work together. Well, there isn't really anything to be fixed because individual organizations won't be the one to fix this. And also, Max Schrems said 101 complaints about Google Analytics. It's not just about Google Analytics. It's about all the US service providers we use to send data to. And also, it's no solution to use a US service provider with, for example, hosting solutions in the EU, because the Foreign Intelligence Services Act sees on access to the data when someone has a mother company in the US. So also all these kind of constructions and solutions don't offer a real solution. So to end it, what I hope it means, and from a lawyer perspective, I don't think it's fun to every time a program is invalidated to help and have this discussion over and over again. So I really, really hope for a real solution for all of us. And I think there are two solutions. One is that the US will actually change its national laws. And the other solution is the European Union just to accept the risk that they have national laws that give the opportunity for the US government to access the data. It will mean no more insecurity for the organizations using it, and no more pointing the finger at them, because they won't be the ones to fix it. And in the meanwhile, if you don't want to have any issues, and you're here based in the EU, I just advise you to have a stress-free life and switch to a European provider that stores the data in the EU, as far as we don't have another solution yet. So I tried to give you all the information in almost 25 minutes. I could talk about this an entire day, so sorry if I talk too fast or I give too much overload of information. I see almost 2.5 minutes for questions, if there are any.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I think we absolutely have time for 2 or 3 questions. There are hand raises just right here already.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Very clear. I have a question. So there is a pattern there. So there is a new regulation, then MAX appears, and then it's cancelled and new. So why is it? Why the process is like that? Like, can they build it, send for review to MAX, and then publish?
They could, but they wouldn't want to, because then there won't be a program in such a short time. And also Max is, of course, a lawmaker. So what happens is that the European Commission sets up the framework to work together with the US. And if Max would appear while making the framework, and Max did comment on it because they posted a flyer, I think it was March 2022, and they said, oh, we agreed on something, and Max said, what did you agree on? They didn't tell, of course, yet, but if they would do so, they would have a problem, because he would want the real issue to be solved, and that's no quick fix.
No, but so why aren't they interested in solving issues? Because that's like stretching the problem, and everyone is suffering.
Yeah.
So why does it exist like that?
I don't think I have a really good answer to it, but like I said, I do think this is more a politics question than it is a legal question. So if you would go for the 2 solutions I offered, so accept the risk as the European Union, or change the US national laws, I don't think the US will do it. And at the same time, I don't think the EU wants to accept the risk. And if they would do so, we would also have to change our laws. And if you look at how long it took for the GDPR, I think it was about 4 or 6 years probably, you see that solution takes way longer than just pushing a framework, and we can work all together happily for 3 or 4 years again and then just do it over. I know it doesn't make any sense, I agree, but I think this is the way they think.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it doesn't make sense.
I think, Maciej, you also had a question? What can you do?
Hey. So I'm not really good with data privacy, and I don't know anything almost about that, and especially in legal perspective. But you actually told everything so clear. So I have one question that was bothering me for quite a long time, and here's just a question. So if I have a solution that is working only in US, and it is collecting privacy data, and there is one person from who's a citizen in Europe who came into US for a trip and actually used my solution. According to the current regulation, what should I do next as a owner of a US solution?
So you have a US solution, it's based in the US, and then you have an EU citizen going for a trip to the US using your solution. You don't have to worry. Because you have, when it comes to the GDPR, and that is way back to the basis, it also looks at what is your focus group? So if you offer your solution only in the US, you can't help it that someone travels for a short visit from the EU to the US. You have a US solution, so don't worry about it. They look at things, for example, the currency you offer on your website, or the languages, or the payment model. Do you need a US address for it? So if by accident an EU citizen goes to the US, and it's also, you don't have to worry about it, and the focus of the GDPR is also not the EU citizens, but the people moving around in the EU. So data collected from data subjects in the EU, so you don't even have to be an EU citizen for that. But if by accident an EU user uses your solution in the US, just forget everything I just told you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can take one more. You two gentlemen decide who takes it.
Just make sure you throw it carefully. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I had the impression that the only real source of incompatibility is this Intelligence Act. So do I understand correctly that if Americans could be convinced that Europeans are people too and have a right to privacy, this wouldn't be a problem and everything would be fine?
Yeah, that's true. And if you could convince them that the US government doesn't have because they will feel like they also have to protect, now I'm going to look from a US perspective, they have to protect their country and their people, so they feel like they have the right to infringe our rights doing so. So yes, it's a part of the visa, so the US Act that says they can use intelligence services, but also about the solutions we have as a non-US person to go to court, for example, and say that what they do is wrong. So when they would change that, that will be a solution, yeah. But if you could convince them, you would make me a really happy person.
Okay, I think now we have to call this the end of this session. Thank you, Lisette. This was interesting. There's only one more presentation prior to coffee break, so if you have further questions here, yeah, go talk with a coffee in the hand. Thank you, Lisette.